I know a colleague of mine we always talk about is teaching race and gender, and how for her, she's a white female, how it's easy for her to get through race and get through the concepts and actually teach the class and keep it moving. Yeah. But when it comes to gender, she gets a lot of resistance, right? Especially from men. For me,
crazy.
When I teach race ethnicity, I get a lot of resistance. But when I teach gender and sexuality, I can get through the lesson, right? So these dynamics. So one of the things that I really wanted to let our viewers hear and talk about our perspective and what we go through as sociology instructors is how do we address teaching gender inequality, domestic violence, rape, these very topics that are hot button, but we as men actually reproduce a lot of the language, reproduce the gender inequality, right? So what are some of your thoughts, your experiences?
You know, when it comes to, I mean, in teaching my students, the easiest thing for me to do is actually just pick on myself, because you know, if you start going into the audience, that's one of those. It's like this is a non-Oprah moment. It's like you can't go into the audience with this one. You got to actually be real and just let people know. It's like, look, I even do this, and here I am. I'm a sociologist. I got my PhD. I'm supposed to be, quote, the enlightened one. And so my best example is that my son, I have a 13-year-old son and a 4-year-old daughter. And one day I'm hearing him, like, you know, my daughter, she's you know, fidgeting around and saying, you know, what can I do to help? And my 13-year-old son says, you just sit there and look beautiful. And I'm like, man, that's a really jacked up thing to say. Who taught you that? And well, thank you. Right? You know, and then my son and my wife both looked at me and said, "You are the one that says that all the time." And I'm like, yo, I do, but, and I'm like coming up with all these excuses as to why I say it. But in real time, it was just like, dude, that's really jacked up. Right. You know, and how I'm replicating gender and what women are supposed to be viewed as, and it's just like I said, it's really easy to pick on myself.
And for me, one thing I go back to is like the socialization of it, how we learn these inequalities, how we learn to treat females differently. Right. I always talk about Disney movies in my class when I get to this topic, right? And sort of introducing, right, this idea of rape culture, how this is cultural, it's pervasive. So I always pick on, and it's my favorite movie, but Beauty and the Beast, which is a movie,
Academy Awards and everything. I mean, it
must be a good movie. Celebrated, and it's loved. Yo, that movie is about domestic violence.
Yeah, yes, it is. It is.
I mean, I tell my students, right, imagine if you had a friend and she came up to you and was like, oh, I met this guy and he yells and he's snarling and he locks me in a room and I can't eat unless I eat with him, and he kidnaps my father, and then he makes me talk to these teacups and these house objects. Like my only friends are the objects in the house, and I can't go in this side of the room. Other words, he really I get scared for my life. But you know what? There's something there that wasn't there before. I think I fell in love with him. Oh, and he bought me something after he yelled at me. He bought me a library.
Well, that makes everything better.
That makes everything better, right? The whole movie just really enforces this notion of domestic violence and this notion of male physical supremacy and protection, which is really rooted in rape culture. Yeah. Right?
No, absolutely. And so when you're thinking about it, because our society promotes this idea of rape, and you know, and it all comes around to just consent. What is consent? And look, I get it. People have sex. I get it all the time. Yeah, I get it. But look, it's like when a woman says no, stop. Right. And it's like, and that's a hard thing for whatever reason for men to understand. It's like, she says no. It doesn't matter where you're at in this actual act. You can actually be doing it. And if you're doing it, and she says stop, it's making me feel uncomfortable. You need to stop. You need to go, take a cold shower, get your iPod out, whatever it is you need to do. You gotta handle that, son. You got to stop, because if you don't, that's rape. Period. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. I don't care how it started. I mean, there's this case that we talk about in regards to that. There was this girl who got raped by her driving instructor, and that the court convicted her, the jury convicted her, but later on the judge goes back and overturns the conviction by saying that this girl was wearing really tight jeans, and so if she was wearing really tight jeans, then she must have given her consent to have sex. And it's like, did that actually come out the mouth of somebody?
And I thought that was in the 70s when you first told me about it. I'm like, it was 1975?
This is in the 90s, the 90s. And I'm like, what? Is this really the world that we have? And the answer is yes. That is the world that we have. And so when we're talking about rape and gender and all of this stuff, it's all muddled into basically just the lower standard that we hold women and that we hold being feminine in our society. And that's just, that needs to change. We need to definitely have much more respect for that.
So in summary, Bruce does that by talking about how he messes up his daughter. And
how I'm raising a daughter that's absolutely going to replicate the system that is.
Right. Yeah. And I do it by consuming Disney movies, which I absolutely love and hate simultaneously, so I'm confused. And I think that's how we teach sociology.
And you're supposed to hate Disney movies, but we still watch them.
Yeah.
But you're supposed to hate the parts that are hateable.
Yeah.
Always remember that. Anyway, we're done.